you want to put the first slide up, Paul? Thank you. So, we're in the fourth of our series of Being Christian. It's from the book by Rowan Williams, if anyone wants to follow it up. And it's about communion, the Lord's Supper, or Eucharist, as it's called in different traditions. And it's something we come back to regularly, because Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, and we do, and we've already done it this morning, so you know what I'm talking about. We've got the remnants here to look at as an illustration. So at the very centre of what we've done, there's a table and a meal, and we reduce it to symbols, but they carry the meaning of this hospitality and welcome of Jesus. And we've sung several songs about welcome today, and our stories, our Bible readings have been about welcome as well. So if there's only one thing you take away from this morning, it's this quote: in communion, Jesus Christ tells us he wants our company. That's the lovely good news, that Jesus invites us to this table. We may be like Zacchaeus, we may be like the lost son, the prodigal, but Jesus wants our company here. It's not a party without us. Communion means to live as people who know that they are guests. They're not outsiders. They're not excluded. We're welcomed by God. And at the Last Supper, Jesus said, I've earnestly desired to eat this meal with you. Said it to his disciples, and that's extended to us as well. Before this, throughout Jesus' ministry, if you heard laughter and talking and singing in Galilee about 2,000 years ago, probably Jesus would be at the centre of any party that was going on. You overheard this happening. Jesus brought the party wherever he went. So there was eating and drinking at every one of his meetings and his teaching. There was always a mention of food. This week, Mark's mum's been staying. I won't make any mother-in-law jokes. And she loves watching a programme called The Chosen. Does anyone watch that? Has anyone heard of The Chosen? Linda has. You watched all 5 seasons of it? No, you're not quite a fan, are they? But it's a dramatisation of the life of Jesus, taken from all the Gospels, I think. But even after 5 seasons, it still hasn't got to the cross yet. So that's in season 6, we're promised. So a lot of it is biblical material, but there's some backstory, some invented things about the disciples, which is quite interesting. So every time I've gone into the living room this week, The Chosen has been on. So I keep seeing clips of it and hearing Chazzy quite loud as well. But I've been struck by how many scenes in The Chosen are meals and parties. And when it's dramatised, it comes home to you that so many of the gospel stories are about food, about eating together, about parties. Jesus' first miracle in John's Gospel is about saving a party, turning the water into wine at the wedding of Cana. As Jesus' mother Mary is concerned for the shame and embarrassment of the host, the bride and groom's family, because they run out of wine halfway through the party, and that would be a terrible shame on them. And she asked Jesus, he hadn't started his ministry, but she says, you do something about it. I know you can. I know you're able to do something about it. And he feels pressurised into starting his ministry maybe a bit early. But he prays for the water to be turned into wine. And the guests are amazed. And they say, well, the hosts, they've saved the best wine until last, because normally you would give the best wine first, and then people wouldn't notice after that. But Jesus' generosity and willingness to mix with unsuitable people, like we heard in the story of Zacchaeus, was embarrassing for some of his followers. They said he eats with sinners, and they were a bit squeamish about that because they didn't count themselves as sinners. They said this disapprovingly. Jesus eats with sinners, and it would make him unclean, make him dirty. And Jesus continues to eat with sinners today as he invites us to eat with him. And it shows that Jesus knew about hospitality, knew about welcome, that it should be offered as well as received and offered. And Jesus says to Zacchaeus, aren't you going to ask me to your house? Jesus had no house to invite people to, so he went to their house. He knew all about hospitality, about inviting himself, offering it and drawing it out of others. And we can imagine Zacchaeus panicking and thinking, what have I got in the cupboard? So what does it mean to have Jesus eating at our house? There's a famous picture, let's have a look at it. You can see it, but not very clearly here. It's called The Light of the World. It's a picture based on this verse at Revelation that we read at the beginning. Listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. So it has Jesus with the lamp, the light of the world, knocking on the door. But if you can see closer, you'll notice there's no handle on the outside. So I think it was intentional, the artist didn't put a handle on the outside. So the person inside, or the people inside, have got to open the door to let Jesus in. Jesus doesn't barge in, he asks permission to come in. He says, will you invite me to your house? Will you open the door to me? And he promises, he says, if you open the door, if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and eat with you and you with me. A lovely promise from Jesus, that we need to open the door of our hearts, open the door of our lives. Just notice that this passage, it wasn't written to an individual, it was written to a church, the church at Laodicea. So it's something we need to do, not just as individuals, but as a church. We need to open the door to Jesus and invite Jesus in to eat with us, to sit with us. And Jesus is saying something about the two-way nature of welcome. It's not an invasion, an availability, an invitation, a sign of welcome. And this dynamic of Jesus offering us hospitality, but also receiving our welcome, we need to open the door to Jesus. It can be seen in the story that John read. Jesus meeting the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection. And first, Jesus is a stranger on the road, leading a meal, and the two disciples, it's getting dark, and their duty was to offer hospitality to strangers. There was no Airbnb then, so he needed a meal and somewhere to stay. So they offered hospitality to him. So first he's the stranger, and then at the table Jesus becomes the host when he breaks the bread and gives thanks. And as host, the disciples recognise him. And in some churches, as you probably know, the bread is called the host because of this welcome, because of Jesus. It represents Jesus' body who welcomes us. In Greek, the word philoxenia, it means three different things. It means host, guest, and stranger. Philo means love, love of host, love of guest, love of stranger. So you can see this, it's interchangeable often in the Gospels, like in this passage. Jesus starts as a stranger, becomes a guest, and then becomes the host. And that's an encouragement to us. In the New Testament, philoxenia refers not so much to love of strangers, but to a delight in the whole guest-host relationship and in the surprises that may occur. Jesus brought a surprise because when he broke the bread, they realised it was Jesus risen from the dead. You can anyone see what other word comes from this xenia? So philoxenia means love of stranger, love of host. What other word do we use xenia for? Xenophobia, yes, which means fear of a stranger. So we've taken that word, which is a positive one in the Gospels, that you welcome strangers, and we've put it into something negative, fear, xenophobia, where we're scared of strangers and we're very suspicious. Stranger danger, we teach our children. So we need to think about that as Christians, how we greet people who are strangers to us, and how we're immediately suspicious of them. But Jesus says welcome the strangers, because they may turn out to be Jesus or may turn out to be an angel in disguise. We're guests of Jesus. At the same time, we're set free to invite Jesus into our lives, and we literally or metaphorically or spiritually, we receive him into our bodies in communion, the Lord's Supper. And the early Christians were accused of cannibalism because of this, because they said they were eating the body of Christ. And so they said, what are these Christians doing? They're eating somebody's body. They misunderstood. Jesus' welcome gives us courage to open up to him. And as well as Jesus being guest, well as us being Jesus' guest, he is our guest. And that also frees us to invite others to share this invitation with others, with other guests. We've experienced the hospitality of God in Jesus Christ in our lives, so we're set free to be hospitable to others, to welcome others. It's not a coincidence that most food banks and food pantries in this country are run by churches. Showing hospitality with people by food has always been a mark of those who follow Jesus. Offering a welcome to the stranger and those who are struggling, those who are marginalised and outside, has always been a mark of Christians. So we learn to see our neighbour as God's guest. The person next to you is also wanted by God, and sometimes we're uncomfortable about that. How much simpler would it be if God wanted only my company and the people I approve, the people I decide to invite? I was looking through C.S. Lewis's book this week, The Screwtape Letters. It's a humorous book about letters a senior devil writes to a junior devil, about the art of temptation of humans. And the senior devil talks about encouraging the new Christian that the junior devil's been assigned to. He says, encourage him in church, not so much to concentrate on worship, but to look round at the other people next to him. Look round at the neighbours around, and he wants to encourage him to put him off. Think, these people, has God invited these people as well as me? He wants to ridicule him. As a quote from C.S. Lewis says, provided that any of these neighbours sing out of tune, have shoes that squeak, or double chins, or odd clothes, the patient, the one who's being tempted, will easily believe that the neighbour's faith is ridiculous, and they are undeserving of God's welcome. Yet when we look at ourselves, we realise that we too are undeserving of God's welcome, and we might be a bit ridiculous too. But God has extended that invitation to all of us. Hospitality is not just about parties, though. Communion remembers the Last Supper. And Jesus comes to be at home in our lives, not just with the laughter, but also with the tears. Not just the joy and the good times, but the brokenness. And you know those parties or weddings that start well, but end up with a fight in the car park. Or think of Christmas, which many of us look forward to, but sometimes dread, because there's family tension. A couple of days together would be great if you can avoid certain topics, or keep certain people away from others. Or it comes home to you remember people who are not there anymore. Even the Beckhams, for all their wealth, had a massive falling out with their family. Jesus says, come to the table with all you have. I'll come into your life, and it's really lived, and I'll start to mend things for you and mend things in your relationships as well. Coming here in remembrance of Jesus at the cross and at the meal table, in the tomb and at the party, is how we hold those things together. Yet it's only possible to do this remembering well because of the resurrection. Without the resurrection, communion becomes only a sad meal, another absent loved one, another time that started well and finished badly. But after the resurrection, Jesus appears to his disciples several times, and there's lots of eating. And he says, "Aren't you going to give me something to eat?" when he appears amongst them. It points to Jesus' bodily resurrection, but also points to the importance of hospitality, of eating together. And in Acts it says the disciples ate and drank with him in time between the resurrection and the ascension. So this, next quote. Holy Communion makes no sense at all if we do not believe in the resurrection. In some churches, communion is called Eucharist because that means thanksgiving. And it's thanksgiving for the cross, but also the resurrection, for everything that God has done. So we celebrate communion, the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus in both the good and the bad of our lives, in the good and bad of our world. And we so much need that today. Jesus, the life and soul of the party, mending it when it all goes sour. Let's open the door as Jesus knocks. Let's hear his voice, and he will come in and eat with us. Amen.